Welcome back, everyone. We're going to head into part 2 of lecture 24, talking about generalized anxiety disorder. There are a variety of anxiety disorders, and the textbook lists the major ones. There's 5 or 6 different types. They are common, so about up to a quarter to a third of people get at least one at some point in times in their lives. As I mentioned, there's many different types. And again, I want to reiterate, like I did with depression, that having feelings of anxiety is normal. Having anxiety emotions is normal and part of life and living in this world. But when we're talking about anxiety disorders, we're talking about some type of fear or worry that is often uncontrollable and out of proportion to what would be an appropriate response, and that it then also persists over time, so it doesn't resolve. So there's a big difference between anxiety as a normal human experience and anxiety disorders. What causes these anxiety disorders to come up? Well, we certainly know in terms of risk factors that genetics seems to play a role because family history will increase your risk. We certainly know that the environment in which you live and are raised can have a big impact, especially if you've had a history of trauma. And now this makes sense as we think about how we've learned about how our memories form and about how we use our memories to interpret current contexts. So if throughout much of your life the world was a dangerous and scary place, it is easy to understand that you would bring that lens or that script to situations that might not be dangerous and scary because it's just so ingrained from your past experiences. In terms of what actually is causing it in the brain, it's very clear that in people with anxiety disorders, they have an overactive amygdala. Remember, amygdala, the fear is the emotion it's really, really good at. And remember, then the amygdala signals the hypothalamus, which activates the sympathetic nervous system. So many of the anxiety disorders will have physical symptoms that can be due to activation of the sympathetic nervous system: high heart rate, stomach ache, breathing quickly, feeling sweaty, all of those things from activation of the sympathetic nervous system by the hypothalamus in response to signals from the amygdala. Why exactly is the amygdala overactive? I couldn't find a good succinct hypothesis on that, like I could for depression in terms of what the different competing hypotheses are. One of the things that they talked about in the textbook is this idea that evolutionarily, there were lots of scary things happening on the regular, that we were having to run from prey, we were narrowly escaping death on a frequent basis, and so our sympathetic nervous system was regularly activated in a way that was very beneficial for us and allowed us to survive by running or fleeing or whatever it may have been. So then they'd say, okay, well, modern life, your life isn't in danger most of the time, and so your sympathetic nervous system is just kind of like, I don't know, bored, and so then it like overreacts because it just expects that it's going to be activated regularly. So now it's activating in response to, like, I don't know, forgetting to do your quiz on time, maybe, right? Which is not a life-threatening situation. I don't know. I can say that in support of this kind of idea, there is data that shows that exercise in people who have anxiety disorders can be very helpful. And one of the reasons why it's felt to be so helpful is because exercise is another way that you activate your sympathetic nervous system. You do it in response to the increased demand for oxygen and glucose. But your blood pressure goes up, your heart rate goes up, your breathing goes up, you get sweaty, all of those things. And so there is some evidence to suggest that allowing your sympathetic nervous system to like do its thing on the regular can be really helpful for anxiety disorders. So maybe that's in support of this hypothesis. I don't know. So the disorder I want to focus in on in our brief time for this lecture is generalized anxiety disorder. Now, what we mean about generalized is that it's not any one specific thing. It's general. It can be this thing, it can be that thing, and it often will just move, like you'll be anxious about this one thing, and then once that thing is over resolved, now the anxiety just switches focus to this other thing. And so what we're talking about here is severe and persistent worry about a variety of things, right? It's not just spiders. right? That would be a phobia that is difficult to control and that persists over time. It doesn't go away. It just kind of goes on and on. There's always something that you are anxious and worried about, and you can't control that. And so oftentimes people will know that their worry or fear about something is absolutely out of proportion to the impact that that thing might truly have on their life, and yet they cannot control it. Physical symptoms are common: headaches, stomach aches, muscle tension, rapid heartbeat, sweating, right? All those activation of the central nervous system types of things. And again, if it's a disorder, it's causing some type of impairment in your ability to do your life tasks, whether that be school or work or taking care of things in the home or maintaining your relationships with others, right? So it's causing problems for you in your life. We'll often see people have a lot of irritability as well. Kind of they're always like on edge, trouble sleeping for the same reason, and then fatigue, in part because of the trouble sleeping, but also in part because worrying about things all the time takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot out of you. And then you also tend to see avoidance. So people not doing things that might make them feel more anxious, people avoiding situations that might trigger their anxiety. And that can get really problematic. And we're going to talk about that, I think, on the next slide. I don't know. Let's see. Yes. So that's called the anxiety cycle, right? Say if maybe going to have lunch at the Commons is stressful because you just don't like all those people. That makes you feel really anxious. You're worried that people are judging you or looking at you like you're not cool enough. So then maybe you avoid going there, or you only go there when there aren't as many people around. Well, in the short term, that helps alleviate discomfort. That helps alleviate the anxiety. The unfortunate thing is what you're subconsciously training your mind to believe is that rooms with lots of people in them are dangerous, right? So it continues to reinforce this idea that the thing that you're anxious about is potentially harmful to you. When remember, the whole point is like, no, that's your worry is out of proportion. And so what we find is that avoidance of something that triggers somebody's anxiety ends up feeding the cycle and making their overall anxiety worse. So if you've ever been in a car accident, when I was a teenager, I totaled my mom's car. I was fine, thankfully. And the very next day, my mom said, all right, I need you to get in your dad's car and I need you to drive to the store and back. And I was like, Mom, I don't want to, I'm totally spooked. I'm totally scared. Like, I don't want to drive the car. And she said, you're driving that car. Right? So that kind of getting right back on the horse, doing the things that make you uncomfortable, do the things that you're afraid of, actually is really important in helping managing anxiety. And I think sometimes we want to be very supportive of people with mental health challenges, and that comes from a really good place. But sometimes allowing people to avoid or stay away from things that trigger their anxiety ends up actually making the problem worse. So one of the treatments that we'll talk about is actually exposure therapy. So that brings us to treatment. So psychotherapy is very helpful for generalized anxiety disorder. Cognitive behavioral therapy, again, looking at the lenses through which we view the world, changing our perceptions and the biases that we bring to bear on our situations, reinterpreting them, changing our thought patterns about certain things can be very, very helpful. But then there's also exposure therapy. So in a safe environment with the psychotherapist, then exposing somebody to things that make them anxious and then helping them see that, oh, you survived that, right? Like, yes, you felt anxious at the time, but we moved through it and you got through the other side and you're fine. So that actually is one of the mainstays for most folks with generalized anxiety disorder. And then there's also something called acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT. So it's kind of similar in some ways. It's like, okay, it is what it is, and what am I going to do about it? I don't know as much about that, I confess. Medications are also really helpful for anxiety, particularly the SSRIs, which is interesting, right? They can be very helpful. And so even though they're antidepressants, they also, especially many of them, are very good for helping to lessen anxiety and that uncontrollable worry that people often describe. In the past, we used sedative type medications like Valium or Xanax to treat anxiety. And in the short term, those work quite well. People really liked them. But the problem is that they are habit forming and they start rewiring connections in your brain. So for most people, most of the time, those are not recommended treatments. Then, of course, behavioral interventions, lifestyle interventions. Again, the better you support your brain, the more likely it's going to be able to function optimally for you. So meditation is really important for folks with anxiety disorders, as is exercise, as we discussed earlier, perhaps because you're activating the sympathetic nervous system in a safe way, allowing it to, I don't know, get all its adrenaline out, but also learning that just because your heart is pounding, it's not necessarily going to be dangerous to you. That can be helpful too. So in summary, all anxiety disorders have some type of severe and persistent fear or worry that's out of proportion to whatever the situation at hand may be. Generalized anxiety disorder is where you have a difficulty in life due to hard to control worry about all sorts of things. It's not a particular thing. And it can have certainly psychological and physical symptoms as well. And sometimes it's the physical symptoms that end up bringing people into the clinic. They have these headaches that won't go away or stomach aches that won't go away. And we need to be careful of the anxiety and avoidance cycle, which makes anxiety worse. The data is actually pretty clear on that. So treatments are effective. So psychotherapy, including oftentimes exposure therapy, as well as CBT or ACT, medications like the SSRIs, and then behavioral interventions like meditation, like exercise, like sleeping regularly on a schedule, eating good food, all of those things. All right, so that's it for the generalized anxiety disorder. In the third and final installment of this lecture, we'll talk about PTSD.